Hello, and welcome to another version or another edition, I should say, Cindy, of the Unfiltered podcast. The title of this one is Return of the Rubber Chicken Tour. Now, this might make you guys go, "What?" And what does she mean by rubber chicken? I've never heard that expression. Cindy, can you kind of just elaborate a little bit on what we mean by rubber chicken tour?
Well, folks that do a lot of speaking or education and end up on the road doing a lot of traveling, particularly at conferences, get very much, kind of stuck with a lot of the standard conference meals. And very often the meal or one of the options is chicken. So it's kind of an inside comment that folks will make is, oh my gosh, if I go to any more conferences, I'm just on the rubber chicken tour because all I'm eating is chicken, varying degrees of chicken at every conference I'm invited to.
Okay, that makes sense to me because I've been at those conferences where you're stuck in a place, you don't really know the area that you're in, and getting food sometimes is at the whim of whoever's holding this event. And there's actually been a time, and maybe the listeners don't want to know this, there's been a time that you were in a city far, far away from me, and I ended up having to order your lunch for you because the people that were running the conference did not provide any sustenance or nutrition at all. So that's kind of what we mean. Eating you eat at your own peril sometimes at these events. And what we mean by the return of the chicken tour is rubber chicken tour is that we are seeing a lot of educational opportunities, especially surrounding OASIS E. What do you think is a problem with the rubber chicken tour versus um, other ways to educate OASIS E?
Well, it seems, Sherry, we're going back to the way it's always been done when it comes to educating around major OASIS changes. And that model tends to be the 2-day blitz. And I want to be real clear here. I am not just saying anything disparaging about 2 days of focused attention on OASIS. That's great. There's a time and a place for that. But we got to think about the fact that very often we don't have that kind of time in reality. We don't have time to have a singular focus on this for hours at a clip. And then sometimes after that event, how well does that translate into real life application? And because of the time consumption involved, it becomes a question of, as an agency, who can I send? Who can I part with for that amount of time? Which overwhelmingly tends to be folks in a review capacity or a QI capacity, an office-based individual. Rarely do we see frontline clinicians in any significant numbers being sent to one of those events. So now we've teed it up that we're in a train the trainer model again, that we're sending individuals that are going to this event, that they're supposed to absorb everything in a 2-day blitz, and then they're responsible to come back and spread this information in the agency. What are your thoughts on that model, Sherry?
Well, there's a concept with education, Cindy, and it's called the leaky bucket concept. And it's kind of known through educators that when you go into something and you get a full bucket of information, if you're the person sitting there receiving that information, it will fill your bucket up because you're sitting in front of an expert in the field and your bucket will be filled. But every subsequent person that you educate on down the line, however many steps below you they are, you leak information from that original education. So the risk that you run is that person number 5, after you've seen it in person live and filled your bucket, is going to have 5 steps of leaky bucket behind them. They're going to have less information than what you had. And that's risky, right? Because you have people that go out into the homes every day and they are gathering this data, particularly on the OASIS. Let's use the OASIS. We're using the OASIS principally now in this discussion, but they will have a limited amount of info compared to the person that actually attended the session. And that's the risk that you run when when you send your folks to the rubber chicken tour to get that full information. They're going to come back and they're going to educate folks, but just you have to understand that they're going to educate them with less information than what they received.
The other thing that bothers me about that, and everyone, if this is your first unfiltered productions, we name it that on purpose because this is not an educational event. This can get quite uh, emotional, as it were, and this is a hot button for me because what I struggle to understand is at what point did we make OASIS so complicated that we can't trust the clinician to be properly educated and collect the information correctly from the jump. I mean, now we see issues around how many reviewers do we have to have on staff because we have to review 100% of these documents forever because the clinicians don't get it right. Or now we're going to have real time where I'm in the home trying to assess a patient and I'm linked to a QA person who is somehow smarter than me at answering these questions while I'm the one in the home with this patient. OASIS is not rocket science. It has one of the most explicit manuals, I would argue, way better than the coding manual, Sherry, with
Mm.
respect to this is what you do in these situations. And somehow I think we took what CMS tried to create as a discipline neutral data collection tool for clinicians to use and made all of these layers of complexity that folks that went to many, many years of medical training and we trust them out with complex IVs and critical medical conditions now suddenly are incompetent when it comes to reading a question that is the same question every time and following guidance that you can also read to help you choose the best response. You know, when I do training with clinicians, Sherry, it frustrates me how frustrated they are that this is so hard, this is too complicated. One person told me this, someone else told me that. So I basically just give up. I'll put whatever answer gets this thing through the EMR, and then I'll just wait for the corrections on the other end and whatever answer they want, fine. It makes them happy. It's the path of least resistance. And so as we look at OASIS E, this is the first substantive change we've had in a while. And if all the current model, the majority of the way we're handling it right now actually worked, it's been so long since we've had substantive changes to OASIS. I would expect everybody right now to be running perfect. If the
Mhm.
feedback given to clinicians, they should have absorbed that, made their corrections, and stopped making mistakes. We should be seeing near perfect or perfect OASIS coming from the clinician now, but we don't. We do outsource coding and OASIS reviews here at Cornetti and Craft and still see nonstop discussion about the functional assessment and but what if the person was told me that they could do it and the cognitive assessment says the patient is forgetful, but item 1700 is marked as 0. It's like, really? We have a chance with OASIS E, not just to revisit OASIS, but come at it from a different perspective. And I think that perspective needs to be our clinicians are smarter than we've allowed them to be when it comes to OASIS data collection. They were the original people that CMS intended to put this in their hands to collect it. So how do we approach this in a way that empowers them to say, yes, we're going to always have someone available to you as a resource with respect to directing you to the guidance manual. And sometimes the guidance manual isn't going to cover that 1 in a 10,000 occurrence that happens with a patient. And we're going to have to put our heads together and figure out which is the best response from what we have. But this kind of only certain people go to certain trainings and then they understand certain magical things. And those are going to be the ones that are going to decide all of this for our organization. I think we can do better. And Sherry, you've heard my rant, and I really think, you know, our training can pivot here and say, how do I put this in front of clinicians? And that's where I think agencies want to do it, Sherry. But the
Mhm.
issue is, I can't pull them out of the field for 2 days.
Well,
I
and
can't take them all out and do that.
that's the thing that slays me about it. And I wanted to elaborate again on the leaky bucket syndrome. The problem with the leaky bucket syndrome is every time knowledge leaks out of the bucket, the individual that's teaching the information will replace what lost knowledge that they have with their own personal information. And so what then happens on the back end is that you have only upper level administrative management level folks going, and then they're teaching someone who's then teaching it again and replacing more and more of that accurate information with their own personal knowledge or their own personal information. And then on the back end of that, when you're doing reviews, that's why clinicians are screaming that, oh my God, I've gotten 3 OASIS back this week and I've gotten 3 different guidances from 3 different reviewers. And that's kind of the thing that takes up some time in your agency, and time equals money. And also, Cindy, I'm just going to say this real quick. It's 2022. We have to get with the times and how to get this information to our clinicians. Sitting in front of somebody live is great, But you can do this virtually. You can do this in a unique way. You can do this in snippets. You could pass it out to your team and create committees for different sections of the OASIS. There's just a myriad of educational tools that you can do that would get the full information to your clinical staff, because as we say at Cornetti and Kraft or at K&K, as we say every day, the front line determines the bottom line, period. Cindy, what do you think the risks are compliance wise by not having this information in the hands of the clinician?
Well, I think sometimes what we see when we audit completed OASIS, so we do audits for individuals to kind of get a feel for, are they ending up with that clean OASIS ultimately once it's finished the review process, is inconsistency between the OASIS response and the narrative content, or inconsistency between that narrative, the OASIS response, and the plan of care. So now we look like, okay, we've aggressively scored OASIS. Yep, especially in the functional area, this person has significant issues, and yet the plan of care doesn't really even include therapy, let alone any sort of focus on those particular issues by therapy. Or we're noting that the individual is apparently, and 1700 is zero with respect to their cognitive issues, and yet the visit notes indicate repeated teaching for apparently an unknown reason, because you said the patient remembers everything the first time in 1700. Why do you have to keep talking about it? So Sherry, I could go on and on about this way longer than your podcast slot. What I want to close with is, be on the lookout for K&K education around OASIS. I am, I guess, over it with respect to the old model. I want to put as many options, as many tools that can go conveniently and easily into the hands of clinicians. And this may sound weird, because we are an outsourced coding and OASIS company, but our goal with our clients is for them to make less mistakes. Everybody's happier when that OASIS comes in with few to no mistakes from the beginning. The reviewer has less to do, so they can go do something else more productive at the agency level, focus on actual patient care and developing things around value-based purchasing and care delivery. And the clinician's happier because they don't get it back again. So that's what our focus is going to be going into 2020. So watch for those things. We'd welcome your feedback about what you'd want for your agency for OASIS training, and ask it. There's no crazy way to look at it. Send us your thoughts, send us your ideas. Say, I wish it would be like this, and we will see what we can do to make that happen.
That's awesome. Thank you guys for attending and listening to us rant, and stay tuned for further information and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks so much and have a great day.